I'm a huge fan of your history books, and it's tough for me because you and Kilmeade are like the one-two punch of historical stuff. And he had a book where he talked with about Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington, which
Yeah,
I
it was
really
awesome.
enjoyed. And then, what was your thought process? Why now? Because
Yeah.
usually history repeats itself. We know that a lot. What made you want to bring up Teddy Roosevelt again at this time in this particular what's going on in the world today?
So first of all, this is the sixth book, and I know
Yep.
you've seen the others: Eisenhower, Reagan, FDR, Grant.
Grant was my favorite.
Yeah, is a cool one. Grant, Washington, and now this. It takes about 2 years, this process. I've got it down to 2 years. The first one took about four. But uh, and Kilmeade's book came out as I was in the research process. So I'm like, he
But
got
they're
there
very
first.
different. They're
Yeah, they're
very
very
different.
different.
That's
Very
the
different. And
yeah.
and I read it during the process, and it was an awesome read. So the reason I chose him is because one, he jumps off the page as far as a character. Like the anecdotes around Teddy Roosevelt are just spectacular. They're like really rich, and it's so I love writing in a way that brings the reader into the room, and it's really easy to do with Teddy Roosevelt because he's got his own writings. Everybody talks about him as this passionate, bigger than life figure. But I wanted to focus, as I did in each one of these books, Tyrus, is a soda straw moment that maybe history overlooked. And my soda straw moment was really what he wanted his legacy to be, which was that America be a global force in the world and respected as a world power. At the turn of the century, we were just kind of coming into our own. And he does that by engaging in the world. He reaches out to the warring countries of Russia and Japan, and they are really devolving into a bad situation that could be a big war. He gets them to come to the U.S., to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Gives each delegation a boat. They have their own spot. He does the logistics. He shuttles back and forth to try to get to a peace deal, and they finally do. And Teddy Roosevelt gets the Nobel Peace Prize for doing that. It puts America on the world stage as, hey, they solved this thing, and they're the ones that did it.
It's funny how duality, right? Because history. I've been talking a lot about George Orwell's Animal Farm, right? That book, which was written, I think, in 1942 or 45 or something, and how
Right.
relevant it is today when you see, and it's the same thing we're seeing the mirror image today, where President Trump was in a very similar situation. Let's just take the one like the Gaza situation, where he's brokering peace, but we're not seeing the same results of like getting the Nobel Peace Prize. But Roosevelt was also kind of polarized. He was an annoyance, and not just his opposite in his own party. And one of the things
100%.
you talked about is like they literally made him VP to like just put him somewhere. I
Put
mean,
them in a box.
yeah, that's, and I'm reading that and I'm like, this reminds me so much. It's very different because no one could put President Trump in a box, but normally if someone said to me, hey, you're going to be VP, I wouldn't look at it as like, oh man, they're holding me down, you know?
At the time, that job was really nothing. It was pre Dick Cheney and before the
Right.
vice president became a very active partner. It was more just a ceremonial title. But you're right. There are similarities with Trump. Larger than life, also stirs the pot, is an annoyance to the establishment, but is a populist. Is you can't really box him down on where he is going to be on every issue. Teddy Roosevelt was pro-capitalism, pro-business, but he wanted capitalism for everybody. He was elitist in that he grew up in a rich family, but he was really about fighting for the poor guy, the downtrodden guy. He's the first president that gets involved in a labor dispute. He solves a coal miners' strike in 1902. He files 40 antitrust lawsuits against J.P. Morgan and other
He
big
was an
businesses.
environmentalist, maybe
He was
our first.
conservationist. Yeah, he saves uh, just some huge territories in the U.S. that today the National Forest Service and all of that, the Park Service, is because of him. He signs, Tyrus, 1,300 executive orders, and just to put that in perspective, George Washington to McKinley, number 25 president, signed 1,200 together, all in in the 25 presidents. He signs 1,300. Trump, first term, 210 executive orders.
which
Trump's
we think
second
is a
term,
lot.
yeah, second term right now, 220. So think about 1,300. He was
Yeah.
about expanding the power of the executive. And, I think he's just going to be looked back as one of the most consequential presidents. Obviously, he was because he's ended up on Mount Rushmore.
You know, when you think about him, you say he was born, in money or a silver spoon in his
Yeah.
mouth, but he came out fighting. He was ill. His father
Yeah.
was extremely tough on him. He lived a lot of lives. I think that's an overused term, but he lived a lot of different lives. And I think that when you have a president who has lived the ups and downs and is more relatable, I think we see better decision making because it's not political. It's life. I think his decisions were based off his life experiences more so than
Exactly.
what was best for the party.
Exactly. He goes through a lot. You're right. He's born and he has debilitating asthma to the point where his mom says, "I don't even think you can get out of bed." She was really worried that he was going to die in the early days. He spent his life in a room behind a window. There's this great shot in the hour special on Fox Nation where it's Abraham Lincoln's funeral going up Broadway in New York past the Roosevelt brownstone. And in the window are two boys, and one of them is Teddy Roosevelt looking at Lincoln's funeral going by. And it's just amazing to think about in that image. The next time those two would meet would be on Mount Rushmore. And I, I think, he uses that asthma, and his dad, you're right, bucks him up and says, "You got to get strong," as a something that he had to get over. And each one of the presidents I wrote about, everybody had a crucible to go through,
Yes.
something they had to get through. Eisenhower came from really poor Abilene, Kansas. Reagan, alcoholic father. The FDR obviously fights through polio. He comes from rich family but has polio and has to fight through that, and that helps him. That's his crucible. Grant, again, abject poverty, is selling firewood on the side of the road. Washington goes through a really tough time in his life early on, and obviously fights through the Revolutionary War. And Teddy Roosevelt, the asthma really him up, but then there was this despair. He marries the love of his life called Sunshine. Her name is Alice Hathaway, and she's just everything he wants. And they are about to have a child. She gives birth. He's a state lawmaker in New York. He's coming back, and she dies on Valentine's Day. The same day his mom dies. And that despair, that grief, forces him to go out west and try to find himself in the Badlands of North Dakota.